Brendon Kleen is here. He covers the Phoenix Suns for Locked On Suns. He was at Media Day in Phoenix. Brendon, first question. How is Mike Budenholzer going to coach this team differently than Frank Vogel based on what you heard at Media Day?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit basketball-wise. This team did not take enough three-pointers. You heard a lot about that at Media Day, specifically referencing that the best teams the past few years have just done that, whether you like it or not kind of thing. Offensive rebounding, creating turnovers, just a lot of things in the margins that this team did not do at a high enough level last year that I think this coaching staff is going to try to implement. Mike, coincidentally or not, things Mike Budenholzer's been great at implementing every step of the way in Atlanta and in Milwaukee and in San Antonio and everything else. But I also think the main thing you heard at Media Day about the coaching change wasn't really about any of that. It was about, I think, liking the guy and accountability. Like Yusuf Nurkic was asked point blank, a big thing is mentioned three-pointers. They want him to take them. Whether you're looking at Brook Lopez or Al Horford or Paul Millsap, that's the track record that Bud has. Are you going to be the next guy? And Nurk said, yeah, and Bud said, yeah, I told him to start shooting. But then after that, Nurk was asked, hey, well, like for 30, 40 games last year, you took a lot of threes. What happened? Why did you stop? And he said, basically, don't ask me. Ask the guy who just got fired. I don't really know. Frank Vogel just told me to stop doing that, and I had to bail on it. And that's why I never got into a rhythm. And you heard stuff like that come up quite a bit that I think this team is not really trying to hide, that it didn't vibe. It did not gel with Frank Vogel. And so I just think you come in this year and the buck's not going to stop with Bud. I think that the front office and ownership have empowered this guy to basically, they're paying him double what they paid Vogel. He has the track record that speaks for itself. I don't think that's going to be the punching bag that Vogel became. I think Bud is bringing a level of respect and he's going to get the buy-in on those things. And this team's just going to have to kind of figure it out, I think, in a way that last year they could always say, well, I don't really like what I'm being asked to do. I don't think that's going to be an option this year.
To go back to Nurkic, I'm really curious about that. I did see that quote out there. He averaged 1.2 three-pointers per game last year. The career high was 2.3 three-pointers a game. That was his final year in Portland. He's a career 28% three-point shooter, but that year that he shot more than two a game, he made 36%, which was basically a career high versus any other year where it was just basically small sample sizes, 24% last year. But, I don't know if Yusuf Nurkic is necessarily as good as Brook Lopez or Al Horford from three-point range, but I suppose Mike Budenholzer thinks he's good enough to at least be a threat spacing the floor. And it's not as if it's not the Joel Embiid situation where, you've got Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal complaining about Embiid taking threes because he's so great and dominant in the low post, to which they actually do kind of have a point. But in this situation, it's not like Nurkic is this like awesome low post scorer with this array of footwork and post moves. This might just be the best utilization of him, even if he is just shooting it at a 30% clip.
Yeah, he is a below average finisher for a center. Right. It's not just that he's not great. He's below average at doing that. He's not a great athlete, and he just has odd touch. Like, you'll just watch the guy miss bunnies and layups, not use the glass. It's strange. So he is an interesting fit from that standpoint. I look at it as, look, yes, you mentioned the final year in Portland, but I look at it kind of the past 4 years. If you add up all of his attempts, he's taken 295, he's made 92 of them. That's 31.1%. If you can even improve marginally on that, you're talking about a passable shooter, right? And I think what that solves for them is, because he's such an interesting fit, and I mean, just a center like him in general in the modern NBA is a little tough, right? You're not really going to put him in the dunker spot. Teams don't do that anymore. That's not efficient enough. He's not a rim runner that's going to go up and finish lobs. So what do you do with him, right? And last year, they basically said he's going to be our point guard in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? He's going to, whether it's like literally walking the ball up the court, being a half-court facilitator. You saw them run a ton of dribble handoff, a ton of side pick and roll where the ball started a possession in his hands. And that's one solution. But then, I mean, you're putting the ball in the hands of your fifth best player,
Right.
like on at any given moment. You add in the fact of Tyus Jones being there now, and that gets even more ridiculous to think about, that you're now taking the ball out of yet another good playmaker's hands in Tyus Jones. So it's sort of, yes, the Bud track record and a maximization of maybe what his skill set might be when you're talking about Yusuf Nurkic, but it's also like making the best of a tough spot. They didn't ask for necessarily Yusuf Nurkic. He's just the guy they got back from Portland in the DeAndre Ayton trade. So we'll see if it works. I could easily see some corner threes, some trail threes. Where does that get you? How much does that really open things up? Are teams really guarding him? Those are all going to be questions I think we see the answer to once it actually plays out on the court.
It's funny that we spent the first 5 minutes of this segment talking about Yusuf Nurkic, haven't mentioned Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, didn't even mention their names, and yet it is an important part in thinking about how this offense is going to function. The other question I had, and I think you know this, but you add Mike Budenholzer as the head coach, you bring in Tyus Jones, Monty Morris, who I think are awesome additions, no doubt about it. How much buy-in are we going to get from Booker, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal to change their games? Guys who are hoopers, guys who want to kind of show off how artful they can be in the mid-range and things like that. They did that a lot last year, right, in terms of doing all the mid-range stuff. It was them in Miami just totally over-indexed on mid-range jumpers last year. Do you think, based on what you heard on Media Day, that we're getting that we're going to get that buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to hope so. I mean, Bradley Beal was asked about it point blank, like, okay, great, saying the right things. Do you feel like it's a reasonable ask of all of you guys to adapt in that way? And obviously he didn't speak for Booker or Durant, but he said, we don't have a choice. Literally what he said. And he said that already, these guys made a big deal of showing up in early September. It sounds like this team's gotten a lot of work in, and Bud has really, given directives to a lot of these players in addition to Nurk with the 3-point shooting already. And Beal said that he sat down with Bud, and Bud showed him a low light reel or whatever you want to call it for, 5-6 different plays where Beal passed up a good 3 and either turned the ball over or took a really bad 2 and missed. And he basically said, look, I'm not asking you to be a different player. I'm asking you to just take what's there more than you are. And I think that's probably going to be the message, right? You're not going to overhaul what Kevin Durant is going to be doing in year 18 or whatever it is, 19 for him. But you're saying, hey, we have a point guard now. We have players. I have a system that is going to generate these looks. Just take them. And then we'll figure it out from there. You're going to get to do your thing, obviously. Bud would be crazy to disempower them of what works, but that's kind of what I meant with the low-hanging fruit. If you're talking about, can this team get from bottom of the pack to average or chip into the top 10 in three-point frequency, I think that's more than doable, and I think the guys will do enough to get there.
The expectation when Tyus Jones signed is that he's going to start alongside Beal, Booker, Durant, and Nurkic. Anything at Media Day to indicate that that's not going to happen?
Yeah, I think Tyus Jones is going to be the starter for this team. Everybody seemed to love him. I think that, that was one of the questions that I guess fans maybe had, is like, how much does that change anything? Bud put it to bed early. He did a Q&A on NBA.com. The starting lineup is going to include Bradley Beal. Get that talking point out of here. And, they want to do what Tyus Jones does best, play faster, play more pick and roll. This was not a very high pick and roll team, and generate more of those threes. And I'm one of the things I'm wondering is like how much of the hype around Tyus is, thank God you chose us, let's just make you feel good, versus like, what's the real impact going to be? I mean, this is a good player,
right?
But he hasn't started everywhere. And, is he going to be closing every game? All that stuff I think is open-ended still.
I liked hearing what Devin Booker was talking about when he was overseas for the Olympics, and the news came down that they acquired Tyus Jones for the minimum, and everybody on the Olympic team was like, how did you guys pull that off?
Exactly.
Which is fair. And players really do love Tyus Jones. I think they respect, the thing that he does so well, which is create plays for others and don't turn the ball over, which is what this Phoenix Suns team desperately needed. This team threw away more possessions than anybody else in the league last year. And so obviously Tyus Jones, and by the way, Monty Morris, they're not going to do that. That historically, that's not what they do. I'm curious, how much was defense talked about at media day, and what are sort of the expectations that they're putting out there in terms of where they want to rank, how good they might be, what it might look like?
Yeah, one quick thing on Tyus and his
Sure.
implementation, just to go back to that. I thought James Jones made a really fascinating point because that was a talking point all year here last season. Do they need one? Who is the point guard between Booker and Beal? And a whole bunch of nonsense that was kind of overly, I think, reductive. It's like, can they make it work or can't they? I don't care what we call it. But clearly they couldn't, and they failed and they got swept. And what James Jones basically said is not that he doesn't think that Beal, Booker, or Durant or anybody else is like capable of upping their playmaking capacity and doing a good job as that lead ball handler, but it's more so the trust of just having a guy, like you said, like Tyus Jones, who is not only well respected, but just it's understood that that's what his role is, right? That he is a traditional setup guy. And when he delivers the ball or makes a decision within the scope of a set, everybody's just going to basically fall in line. Whereas it's not like people thought Devin Booker was, nuking them or anything, but I can sense you're a little uncertain here. I can see you overthinking. The clock is ticking. There's 8 seconds left on the shot clock. All of a sudden I have a grenade. What the hell just happened, right? And I think that they just wanted to avoid that. He mentioned the late shot clock stuff a lot as well. So I thought that was a good way of putting it. Not that he didn't think the other way could work, but it's just about how do you really get the most out of it.
As far as the defense, it lets Durant, Booker, and Beal just do what they do best. Like you said, they're all capable of being playmakers and setting up guys. They've all done it throughout their careers, but that's not the thing that they're elite at. And I think part of a team's coaching staff and front offices make the jobs of your stars easier, not harder. Let them do what they're best at. Don't make them do things that they're not their best at. So, obviously,
if the team's going to go as far as the big three takes it, then make the big three as comfortable as it can possibly be, right? But defensively, today was the first practice. They, of course, in an open gym kind of environment throughout the month of September, a lot of the messaging was like, we're just getting shots up and getting a feel for each other. Today, Mike Budenholzer made it clear that, the focus of camp is going to be on the defensive end. I think that, we'll see how different what he tries to do versus what Frank Vogel tried to do ends up actually being. I think that the personnel on this team is a little bit limiting. You're getting smaller by committing to Tyus Jones playing heavy minutes, and which was already an issue for this team, being undersized. I think, they'll try to just get back to basics. I think, I don't remember who it was. Somebody threw out the top 10 defense being a possibility. I think it may have been Royce O'Neal. It's a lot of, of course that's the goal. You want to win a championship.
Of course it's Royce O'Neal who would say that.
Yeah, you're probably going to have to get there, right? But
right.
Yeah, this is a defensively limited roster. I don't think there's any way around that. Vogel said it outright throughout last season. That was just a fact of what he was dealing with. I think that's still true. We'll see if some of their younger players can maybe break out in a way we're not expecting. They spent a first-round pick on Ryan Dunn out of Virginia. He's a freakish turnover-creating long wing. He's suspect offensively. I don't know if he can, really get minutes early on. If he does, that helps. Otherwise, you're probably talking about how high can our floor be, and maybe is there a move to be made to upgrade on that side of the floor at some point during the season. But it's going to be a weakness, and that's always going to be the case with this big three, I think.
So Budenholzer's talking about it a little bit differently than Vogel is in terms of Vogel's, like you said, a lot in the media was like, yeah, you know what, we're not going to be that good, in so many words. Where Budenholzer's just saying, I think we can read between the lines, but he's talking about how it's going to be. Like what's the way he's talking about it?
I think it's just kind of getting back to basics. I think that the real place that I think that this can get better for them on that end is again, if you don't care for your coach, you're not connected in terms of players, that floor is going to be a lot lower. And we really saw that against Minnesota. They're trying coverages with Yusuf Nurkic 25, 30 feet from the basket, trying to blow up Anthony Edwards' pick and rolls. And they have, just letting Karl Anthony Towns barrel toward the basket unblocked because of miscommunication. There's no backline rim protection and kind of help at all. They just fell apart. They collapsed at the thing that Frank Vogel is supposed to be best at. So to me, if you can establish just chemistry and awareness, communication, have a real scheme that players can buy into, you're going to be a better defensive team. The ceiling of this defense is always going to be relatively low, in my opinion, but you can't have a mediocre regular season defense, which is what the Timberwolves were, make you look like, they're the Harlem Globetrotters or some kind of and one mixtape out there, which is what they did to you. So that to me is where you got to see it change.
Well, we'll see how much it does change. We'll have to check in with you again throughout the season to see, how much of this actually happens. But for now, thanks for the time, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Wes.